Now live from Lviv near the border with Poland, Jonah. So Russian troops are now in control of that nuclear plant. What can you tell us?
So they say, and that isn't being contested by the Ukrainian side. So we assume that is the case. The Russian Ministry of Defense has come out and said, look, these were attacks by saboteurs, essentially trying to stage a Ukrainian provocation by hitting the site, and that the Russian forces were stepping in to defend it. President Zelensky, by contrast, calling it nuclear terrorism. In the middle of all of this, frankly, not concerned with the whys and wherefores of what happened, is the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna, concerned principally with the safety of this site, and not just any old nuclear site. This is the biggest in Europe. It contains 6 of the 15 nuclear reactors present in Ukraine. Rafael Mariano Grossi, the head of the IAEA, held a press conference just a short while ago in the last half hour. This was his update, that there was no release of radioactive material as a result of the attacks and the fire that burned for 4 hours in a training building on the site. The reactors, he said, were not affected. Only one of them was actually operational. Some held in reserve, some under repair, some simply switched off. All systems, he said, including radiation monitoring, are fully functional, operating and working. The situation continues to be extremely tense and challenging. He went on to describe the key pillars of nuclear safety at these plants, the maintenance of security, the inviolability of these sites, maintaining supply lines, maintaining staffing, maintaining critical communications. He said these were absolutely vital, that there needed to be an immediate meeting, well, as soon as possible, he said, of the two parties, to recommit themselves to these key pillars of safety at nuclear power plants in Ukraine. He wants a meeting of the Russians and the Ukrainians at Chernobyl. That's his suggestion. That is, of course, the nuclear power plant, which is just inside Ukraine on the Belarusian border. He said he would head that meeting, and he said it was absolutely imperative to maintain the safety of these nuclear sites.
Jonah, meanwhile, the death toll is rising around the country, but particularly from the attacks in Chernihiv. Give us a picture, if you can, across the rest of Ukraine.
Awful strikes in Chernihiv. We've seen dreadful pictures, some very, very alarming drone footage, floating over what is now a devastated town in the north of the country. No verifiable, no obvious military merit in taking this town, other than that it happens to be on the line of Russia's advance from the north. 47 dead civilians, of course, the latest toll there. The focus of Russia's attacks continues to be in the south, along the Black Sea coast. We know that the towns of Kherson fell yesterday. Berdyansk, a smaller port, fell a couple of days ago. Still holding out along that route towards the eastern breakaway regions. Of course, the much bigger port city of Mariupol, 500,000 people there. We've seen some very graphic imagery coming out of the hospitals there, but frankly, not a great deal coming out, not a great deal of visibility of what's happening in there, because this is a city not only cut off from power and heat, but also from internet and mobile communications. It is entirely surrounded. It is under near constant bombardment, so we hear from the mayor. Similar situation in Kharkiv, big city in the east, 1.5 million people there. Constant bombardment there, near constant at least. And as I said, Chernihiv, this convoy continuing to cast an awful presence close to the capital, Kiev. It has been stalled for about 3 days now, with all sorts of problems besetting it, from logistical problems, supply problems, morale problems, Ukrainian resistance on its flanks, the suggestion that they are regrouping, reassessing, resupplying and preparing to continue. Here's my report, wrapping up the events of the last 24 hours.
Major Ukrainian cities are surrounded and under constant attack. This is Chernihiv, a city of textile factories, churches and monasteries. Its greatest misfortune: to lie on the route of Russia's advance from the north. In the eastern city of Kharkiv too, people wake daily to scenes of terrible destruction and a fast-rising civilian death toll.
Look what Putin is doing. This is a war crime committed against the civilians against the city of Kharkiv.
This city of 1.5 million people, most ethnic Russians, is being torn apart by Russian forces for no reason other than that it exists just across the border from Russia in Ukraine. And in the far south, Ukraine's biggest port, Odessa, is under threat too. Here, frantic efforts have been underway for days to build defences against a possible beach landing. Multiple vessels belonging to Russia's Black Sea Fleet hover on the horizon, including landing ships and support craft. Ukraine's military is very much still in this fight, reinforced by supplies of weapons from abroad. They've been able to apply real pressure to the Russian advance, slowing the progress of a vast column of armour, artillery and soldiers heading for the capital, Kyiv. Along its route, once sleepy commuter towns lie in ruins, a foretaste of what may be in store for Kyiv. The apparent aim to encircle the city and besiege it. From his bunker under heavy guard, President Volodymyr Zelensky wages a relentless communications campaign, rallying resistance and calling in foreign support.
We have been saying this for a long time, that Ukraine is seeking for protections for our home soil and our own people. But such protections have not been provided. European countries assisted us with the waves of migration. However, we should discuss the guarantees that are required to protect our country, our home soil, and our people.
A second round of talks on Thursday between Russia and Ukraine at a location on the border with Belarus came with low expectations of a breakthrough, but a slim glimmer of hope that they're taking place at all. The Ukrainian government, meanwhile, has called for humanitarian corridors to be set up. And here in the western city of Lviv, volunteers are hard at work processing aid donations, medicines, clothes, food and other essentials for distribution across the country.
There is a humanitarian crisis erupting on multiple fronts, not just the internally displaced who've left everything behind in a scramble for safety across the country's borders, as more than 1 million have done since the invasion began, but also huge populations in urban centres, trapped, terrified and desperate for help.
Civilian morale will vary now in a population increasingly terrorised. There'll be desperation in some places, determination in others. A spontaneous rendition of the national anthem at that aid station in Lviv. It is becoming ever clearer that the struggle is not just for personal survival, but for the survival of the nation as a whole. Jonah Hull, Al Jazeera, Lviv.
Let's bring in Samir Puri in Singapore. He is